Welcome to the Women's Hoop Show. Today on the show, we are diving deep into the reality of WNBA trades with someone who's been inside the room where it happens. Angela Taylor is a former WNBA executive with nearly 2 decades of experience across the league. She served as a general manager for both the Washington Mystics and the Atlanta Dream, where she was later promoted to team president. And she held leadership roles with the Minnesota Lynx and at WNBA headquarters in New York. She also is a 2-time NCAA champion with Stanford and an MBA grad from NYU Stern. So yeah, she knows the game from every single angle. With the WNBA trade deadline coming up, we wanted to ask, how do front offices actually think about trades? What's realistic versus what fans imagine? And how much planning happens months in advance? And how do things like salary caps, locker room chemistry, and even the ongoing CBA negotiations shape what teams can or can't pull off? So we'll also explore the emotional side of making trades, how deals come together, and how GMs weigh short-term performances against long-term vision. Got a lot to talk about. Let's get into it. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to talk to you. How are you?
I am doing great. Jordan, thanks for inviting me on the show. Love what you're doing here with this show. And I absolutely love this topic. I myself would love to be a fly on the wall for some of the best GMs in professional sports, just to hear what they are talking about when the trade deadline is nearing. So thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Of course. And I just have to say, Angela and I met at Pac-12 Network. Yeah. RIP. Yeah. Sad single tier role.
We had some good times.
We had some great times, some great games. And even it's so fun to see the players that we were covering at Pac-12 doing their thing now in the WNBA. So I just feel like it all comes full circle. Pac-12 is always with us.
It will always be with us. It'll be embedded in the history and the annals of the WNBA for sure.
Yes, it will. Okay, let's get into it because I have so many thoughts. So first I want to start with, you have held so many different positions in the WNBA before you were even a GM. So how do you think each of your positions prepared you for that position of general manager?
Yeah, great question. I'm a firm believer that the best leaders are self-aware leaders. And those self-aware leaders evolve over time throughout their journey as they just have different experiences. And so I am certainly one of those individuals. I wish that I knew then what I know now. I would have been a much better general manager back in the days. But, I think that if I look at my time at the league office, the WNBA league office since the inaugural season through its 10th season, it was the macro level view of the business of basketball, of all the policies. At that time, we were a single entity. So my boss, Renee Brown, the legend, who really was the one that kind of curated the roster of players that were part of that first season in the WNBA, we were able to see a lot of the policies, the development of the CBA, the first CBA that we were ever able to have. We signed the players to contracts out of the league office at that particular time. And so that macro level view gave me a great purview into what it would take to be a good general manager or to run a team. But it was from collective bargaining to player marketing, understanding that how the league operates and grows, which I think is essential to a general manager or a team president, of understanding like how to go back and forth with the league office, who the key players are in the league office, what some of the processes and the policies are from a macro level that you can then start to take advantage of at the team level. And then from the team level, it was the chessboard. It really was making that transition to first being able to cheer for a team. My first game when I was with the Minnesota Lynx, I sat at the game and it was an out-of-body experience. I was like, I can actually cheer right now. For 10 years at the league office, I went to games on a regular basis and you couldn't cheer for any individual or any individual team. You could just cheer for good play. And so it was a transition to make, but from the micro level at the team level, you're focused on culture, you're focused on the personnel. And, it's less about the the hypotheticals and more about the consequences of your decisions. So decision making, culture building, and people development would be essential as a general manager. And so each of those helped me evolve as a leader. And now I know I'm a much better leader in the spaces that I operate because of each
Mm-hmm.
of those experiences.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad it's you, not me. That sounds like a lot of pressure,
Yeah.
but also, excuse me, very satisfying when all those pieces kind of fit together, right? Like that has to feel really good when it's these decision makings, these ones that you're really thinking about come into fruition. So when you were GM, what was your favorite thing about being a general manager and what
Mm.
was your not so favorite thing about being a general manager?
Wow. I would say there's probably a plethora of things that you enjoy about being able to be in sports and to be part of something special. Um, my favorite things, I would say two things. If you give me the liberty to select two,
Of
one was the
course.
people. Is the people.
Mm-hmm.
Woody Hayes said back in the day, and I'm a firm believer in this, is that you win with people. And so it was the opportunity to interact with some remarkable individuals who you may not ever have had the chance to come across in your lifetime, whether they were agents, whether they were players, or your staff at that particular franchise. But the people, and I think that this is true for many of us, Jordan. I think it was the same for us at the Pac 12 network.
Mm-hmm.
Any stop along the way, oftentimes you're thinking about the title or the job description, your compensation package. But when you really get down to it, the people shapes everything about your experience. So that was one of my favorite things is some of my dear friends and colleagues I was able to interact with through women's basketball and certainly at the WNBA. And I think the second thing is as a competitor, what I recognize now as a serial entrepreneur is I'm a builder. And so
Mm-hmm.
wanting to problem solve, take something from wherever it is to problem solve and to be able to build something special. And for me, having been part of some winning cultures, was really the thing that I loved was figuring out like all of the puzzle pieces, putting the people in the right place, having the right people, putting the right processes in place so that we can build a championship culture and go after that trophy. And so those
Mm-hmm.
are the things I loved. Gosh, least
Yeah.
favorite
What about the
is
not things you loved?
well, I think that all of you would expect, the least favorite would probably be the emotional toll that
Mm-hmm.
it takes when you do prioritize relationships and people. You build real relationships with these athletes, and I think to a moment I can recall having to call somebody into your office at the end of training camp, in the middle of training camp, or even during the season, players and sometimes coaches, unfortunately, and let them know that we were moving on in a different direction. And I think particularly in training camp, when you have 15, 18 players in training camp, and you have a limited roster size, that it's
Mm-hmm.
inevitable that you're going to have to let people go. And it's tough to sit across that table for someone who this is their dream, this is what they've looked up to since they were a little kid when they first picked up a basketball, the chance to play in the WNBA, and they had given it their all. There wasn't anything that they did wrong. They just weren't
Mm-hmm.
good enough to make that roster because it's really the elite, right? It's the top 1 or 2% of women's basketball players that are playing in the WNBA. And so those decisions and, when you waive a player or trade someone, even if it's the right basketball decision, that can weigh heavy on you. And I think that you learn quickly that this
Mm-hmm.
business again is personal, and how do you navigate the balance between strategically making the right decisions for your team and actually building relationships.
Yeah, I know that has to be hard because
Yeah.
I love what you said. This business is personal because sometimes we don't hear it like that. We hear it's not personal, it's business. So you have to kind of block it out. But it's hard when you are building those relationships to separate the two because they are a human sitting across from you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I know that that has to be hard. But we're approaching the mid-season trade deadline. So you talked a little bit about training camp, which is a whole nother thing. And we're
Yeah.
seeing players pop up on our social media get waived. But the mid-season trade deadline, that's this Thursday, is an interesting time because you know what your team, you pick people from training camp, you have some games under your belt. What is the mindset of a GM as the midseason trade deadline is approaching? What are the GMs in the W kind of thinking about right now?
Well, I think it's really important for everyone to know that for most GMs, like you don't set the table here at the last minute, right? The trade deadline is here in a couple of days on August 7th. You don't set the table right now. You've been setting the table for months in advance. So, as
Mm,
soon as the draft is over, you're thinking about your training cap roster. As soon as you have that training cap roster compiled, you're thinking about, okay, what is it going to look that first day of the seasoning, the opening tip off, who's going to be on my roster? As soon as you get that done, you're thinking about like what's going to happen over the course of the season, and paying attention to the culture that's being built, paying attention to fit, paying attention to what's happening elsewhere with other teams and other programs. And so getting ready for the trade deadlines, you're setting the table well in advance. And so I think that the best general managers, and this is across sports, you're operating on multiple different timelines at once. You're looking at the short term. How can we
mm-hmm.
win now? You're looking at the long term. Like, how do I build not just a winning team, a one off, but how can I build a sustainable championship caliber roster and program? You're thinking about your current roster construction, salary cap, your culture. You're thinking about what other teams are doing. And I think right now, with the expansion that's happening in the WNBA, you're thinking about that next chess move is we have some expansion clubs coming in. So there's going to be an expansion draft around the corner. Like, how do I make
Mm-hmm.
sure that any moves I make isn't just a short term move? So, I think you all of those lives, that timeline that you're paying attention to, then you also think at the deadline, are we a contender? Are we maybe a developing team? Are we rebuilding? Do we have a young roster? Do we have an older roster? If you have a young roster, maybe you're focusing on here in the next 2 to 3 years is where we want to start to focus on, and any trades that we make are going to affect us over the next 2 or 3 years. If you have maybe an older roster, you have to win now. And so you need to
Mm,
make a move or stay as currently constructed so that it affects winning in this particular moment. And so you're running these multiple simulations. If we trade a player A, can player B develop faster? Can our systems handle this? Is this player that we're going to bring in? Is she a good fit with our roster? How quickly will we be able to get them up to speed? How is that going to change our our playing style? Uh,
mm,
how are they going to fit? And so the best thing, you know your own roster. You know the gaps that players on your roster have. The grass looks greener sometimes on the other side, but you don't know what that player is like on a day-to-day basis. Do they fit your culture, etc.
mm-hmm.
So you're tracking what all the other teams are doing, and sometimes it's not about what you do, it's about what you prevent somebody else from doing.
Playing a little defense
Yeah,
there
yeah,
through your
yeah.
trade
It's
moves.
chess. It literally is chess
Wow.
and not checkers.
I think one thing that questions that I have been seeing on social media and people have been reaching out to me is the salary cap. So the salary cap is a huge issue in the WNBA right now because it is a hard, firm salary cap. So how much does that play into the trades that you are making, or what is that thought process like? Because I think a lot of people don't understand.
You know what? I'm a much better GM now than I was then when you actually had to pay attention to the salary cap, because you're like, oh, this player would be great on that roster. And so it's so easy just in a vacuum to say this move would make sense or these players would make sense for a team to trade for. But the salary cap is the core factor and variable that you have to consider when you're looking at your roster construction. And it's like, a puzzle, and you're shifting all of these pieces around, and recognizing, like, your limitations. Like, there's no room. You can't color outside the lines with the
Mm-hmm.
salary cap, and you can't just make a move because it sounds good on paper. You have to figure out, like, every dollar matters. How is this going to impact my roster now, for sure, and my salary cap? How much room do I have in this particular moment? But also, what's the length of the contract that the player we're considering to trade for? What does this do to our salary cap in the future, particularly with a CBA coming down the line? Will we have roster flexibility when we consider that? And so you have to not only factor those current contracts in, but you have to think about your draft capital. What do you have to be able to improve your team? And it requires a lot of creativity. It's nice to have a capologist, someone who's always looking at the numbers and figuring out what you can do. The league provides you with a lot of invaluable information that you can consider, but I think that the best GMs are constantly looking at their own cap as well as the opponent's cap, to see like if there's some moves that they may have to make or choose to make in order to stay under the salary cap, not just in the short term, but the long term.
No, that totally makes sense. It is. I love having a capologist on your
Yeah,
team. Just say like,
yeah,
you look at the numbers while I'm trying
yeah,
to think about emotional fit and on the court fit and their skill set. So being able to compartmentalize that. You mentioned the CBA, and you mentioned that you were there for the very first CBA of the
yeah.
WNBA. This upcoming CBA is probably one of the biggest signings in all of women's sports, not only the WNBA. We've talked about it at length, but this idea that next year anybody could be on any team.
Yeah.
It is so interesting to look into the future for a second and just be like, well, my favorite star player could be on her rival team next year because no one or not a lot of players outside of rookie contracts are signed beyond this season. So at this particular trade deadline, how does that factor into what GMs are doing? Because I'm looking at, for example, Kurt Miller in Dallas is getting draft picks because that feels like something that is tangible, that is something that is real, or you are clearing up that cap space so that you could sign free agents next year. So it's not even this season. Like you said, you're working on different timelines. With the CBA coming up, is it just we're looking towards next season and beyond and trying to figure out who's going to be on our roster?
Yeah, there's so many variables that you have to take in consideration. So if you look at the current state, um, you literally do have to figure out where you are. So what Kurt is doing in Dallas may be completely different than what Cheryl is doing in Minnesota because that they're at different stages. So
Mm-hmm.
Dallas is in a developing, rebuilding state. And you have an amazing young talent in Paige Beckers on your roster to be able to build around for the long term. And that may be different than having Nafisha, like right, and having a mature roster that was competing for a championship just a year ago and will continue to do so most likely this year. And so it depends on where you currently are, of like how you were starting to again start to move those chess pieces around before we get to the collective bargaining agreement. And then I think that the other thing, if I'm a general manager, because you're going to have so much player movement moving forward, because players aren't under contract now, and we're going to see a lot of movement in free agency depending on the cap, is I'm going to get my house in order. I'm going to make sure that our organization and the culture that we're setting is attractive and appealing to the top free agents. So,
Mm-hmm.
what your coaching staff looks like, your facilities, the fan base, how you're executing, what your social media looks like. Like, how do we make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's to make sure our organization is an attractive organization when the wild, wild west and free agency happens after this collective bargaining, right? Because that is going to be a factor as players are currently
Mm-hmm.
looking. I think, 10, 15 years ago when I was at the league office, players were looking at it. There wasn't a lot of distinction between the salaries that you can command,
Yeah.
and there wasn't a lot of player agency, if you will, in being able to move. But there might have been some attraction. You might have liked one market more than another. Right now, these players are businesswomen. Like, they're looking to see what is best for them on the court and for their brand and for their family. And so the first thing that I would say good GMs are doing in this moment is getting their house in order, their salary
Mm-hmm.
cap, looking at their coaching staff. Where do we want to be in the next year, the next 5 years, so that we can start to figure out like how we're going to play. And then when you consider the CBA, there's so many uncertainties of what's going to happen. And I think that GMs tend to be a little bit risk averse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have some that are really opportunistic. So if you're unsure how the contracts are going to be structured in the future, or if player movement rules may change, you may hold off. like right on certain things that you're going to do this year, and making big money trades, if you will, at the deadline. And it actually may free you up because of the uncertainty to, like, if I'm in a win now mode, let me go ahead and bring in players. We know there's going to be a lot of player movements in the next year or two. Let me bring in
Yeah.
players now and capitalize on that if I'm in a position to win. So it makes the draft picks that you have, to your point, about Kurt and Dallas. That compensation and currency is extremely important to those teams that are rebuilding. You also have to consider the expansion drafts that will be coming up and how that will factor into it. So there's a lot of different variables that are coming up,
My
but I
gosh.
think it depends on the ownership group and
Mhm.
what their vision is for the organization, what their commitment is going to be to the organization, and what they're going to build to make it an attractive place for free agents to want to go to.
You mentioned the ownership group. This wasn't even written down, but I did have a thought. How involved are the owners when it is a midseason trade deadline? I can totally see an owner flying in as you're going through all of those calculations, an owner flying in and say, "Hey, how do we get this player? They are playing really well and we need them on our team. How can we get them?" Is that type of environment or that conversation, or is it very separate?
It depends, and I know that's a horrible
Oh,
response, but it
yeah,
depends
yeah,
on the
makes sense.
owners, right? You have,
Mm,
I think Malcolm Gladwell talked about, like, you have some owners for professional sports teams who are, it's about the psychic benefits, right? Like, they want to sit courtside and enjoy being the owners of a professional team, and may be hands off and let the leadership team, the general manager, the coaching staff make those decisions. And you'll have other owners that are much more heavily involved. And so it depends in that particular situation. When I was
mm,
with the Minnesota Lynx at that time, our ownership group with Glenn Taylor was very hands off. Like, he trusted, both on the Timberwolves side and the Lynx side, trusted the leadership team to make those decisions and just to run them by him, so that
mm,
he knew how it was going to impact. In Washington, with Dr. Johnson, Sheila Johnson, and Ted Leonsis, may have been a little bit more involved in keeping them up to speed on a regular basis about what you were doing and how you were building your roster. And then the older ownership group that we had in Atlanta at that time was a little bit more involved in wanting to know and get updates on what we were thinking at that particular
mm.
time. So it really depends. And part of that is the rapport that the general manager or head coach, or in some cases, they have that dual role,
That's,
the
mhm.
relationship and the rapport that they have with that ownership group. And oftentimes that is set well in advance.
Okay. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. It just depends on the leadership style and business ownership style that they possess. Take us into a trade. If you are going to make a trade, and say some GMs are scrambling, they're trying to figure it together over these next couple days, who initiates those conversations? What's kind of the channels of conversation when someone realizes that they are about to get traded, or when you realize you're going to trade a player?
Yeah, I think the conversations start internally. Again, relationships and communication are key. So whether it's with the ownership group, the GM, and the head coach, of communicating along the way of what we need. I think that there's a natural conflict that occurs in most front offices, and that's between a general manager who's oftentimes looking at the short term, but looking at the long term. How do we build a winning program and culture over time? How do we
Mm-hmm.
become the Houston, Comets back in the day, right? And put ourselves in a position to consistently compete for championships. And the
Yes.
head coach, who may be on a 3-year contract, who knows that in order to get that second contract, they need to be winning now. And so there's a little bit of a
Mm.
conflict that happens in those situations. So making sure that the head coach and the general manager are on the same page about what their needs are and what moves are imperative in that particular moment is key. And then, again, you're setting the table well in advance. So you are on a regular basis are picking up the phone and talking to a variety of agents, building that relationship with the agents. Agents sometimes give you information that you'll need
Mm.
that can be beneficial along the way. You're talking to other general managers or coaches along the way, and seeing like what they're interested in. And oftentimes people will just randomly call you during the season and inquire about a player, and or mention that they might be interested in trading another player. And so you note that, you track it, and start to see like who might be on the fence, or somebody that is a tradable asset down the line. So these conversations are going on a regular basis, and when a trade happens, it's not out of the blue. Oftentimes,
Hmm.
that table has been set over time, and then it depends on the general manager what you're doing. Oftentimes, there's the conversation that you're securing the trade with the other general manager. You're letting your team and your staff know, and then for me, I like to be the one that was talking to the agent and the player to let them know that we were getting ready to make a trade. So they heard from us, and now it's social media is even crazier. So,
I
but so
know.
that they heard from you what was about to occur. And I will say there were situations where you had to make a decision quickly, and you couldn't get in touch with a player. There was a player at one point who was at the movies and was not picking up her phone. We were able to talk to the agent, but we weren't able to talk to the player. I felt horrible about it when she did call me back, and it had already been publicized that the trade had occurred. But sometimes those things do happen along the way. But if you are an organization that prioritizes communication, some of these things, while you don't want to have to do those, make those, have those conversations, sometimes it helps them land a little bit easier.
I would be so paranoid every single movie that I would go into after
Yeah.
that moment. I would have my phone on to make sure
Yes.
I don't miss a call. That's wild. Okay, tell us more stories. What are some other memorable trades that you were a part of, or that were either Blockbuster that you had to do a lot of things to, or they weren't picking up their phone like that?
Yeah, no, I love that you said Blockbuster, because that was like sometimes you want to have fun with it. It's a long season, a long off season, and sometimes opportunities for trades or player moves happen out of the blue, like where you might be coming up with something that you don't think what can happen, but you make a phone call at the right time, the right place, and things start to come together. And so I would
Mm.
think that one of the most memorable trade situations happened for me when I was a general manager at the executive vice president and general manager of the Washington Mystics, and our head coach was Julie Plank. And we consistently, in every conversation, were talking about player moves. What if this? What if that? How do we get this player better? Like that was a focus on a consistent basis. And at dinners with our staff, our you know operations staff, Natalie, Natalia, Michael Ovechkin, we would just like throw out names like, what if this? How can we make this move? Does this fit? Does that fit? But in 2009, when I first took over as a general manager in Washington, we had a great roster. We had Elena Beard, who, right, iconic legend, WNBA All Star on a consistent basis, and someone that you want to build a winning team around. We had Elena. Monique Curry was on that team and was just at the
Mm.
getting ready to hit her peak. We had Crystal Langhorn, the legendary lefty, who Julie called the perfect 10, didn't make mistakes, practiced hard all the time, did everything right by the book, and continued to get better as her career went along. And then Nakia Sanford as our post player. And we had a big gap at the point guard position. The prior season, Elena had to play the point guard, which was beneficial to
Mm.
her down the line of being having to have the ball in her hands and make decisions, but it wasn't her natural position. And so we wanted to put her back at the twos in more of a natural position so she could focus on scoring and the defensive end as well. So we needed that point guard that was going to be a great leader, an extension of Julie and the coaching staff on the floor, dynamic, be able to create off the dribble, space the floor, and be able to shoot threes. And so we started. I was at Minnesota the year before. Julie was an assistant coach at Minnesota, and so we had drafted Lindsey Harding at the time. And
Mm.
Minnesota had multiple point guards on the roster. Noel Quinn was on that roster, and so we knew that they might have a surplus and that they might be willing to part with a point guard. We really felt that Lindsay was the perfect fit for our roster. And so, we had a variety of conversations. And I remember writing on a napkin, and Julie's mapping it out. Here's the Blockbuster deal. right? So we start setting it up, talking to agents, setting up, seeing what's a possibility. And worked with Roger Griffith at the time, who was representing Minnesota in the GM capacity, and we're able to work out a deal. I want to say we traded our first round pick for that upcoming draft and a second round pick to Minnesota for Lindsay and 2 second round picks. And
Mm.
we felt Lindsay was our first round pick. I think we had the fifth pick in the draft that year,
Okay.
fifth or ninth pick in that draft. And it proved to be a huge pickup for us. It did allow Elena to go back to her natural position. She and Lindsay had played together, so they had that report. Really, she, Lindsay, and Monique had all played together at Duke, so we
Mm-hmm.
had a great backcourt. And went on to have that year and the next year the winningest seasons in Washington up to that point. Yeah, it's believing in it, but I think oftentimes it's knowing what you're trading for. And we had the benefit of knowing Lindsay. Julie had a great relationship with Lindsay from Minnesota since she coached the guards, and that made that decision much easier because we knew the quantity that we were getting.
Yeah, you take out the guesswork from
Yeah,
that part of it. Okay,
yeah.
that is such a good story. I love that because you're sitting at the game now. You're sitting back and it's working. You're like, yeah, I did that. I made this happen.
Well, we did, right? And it really,
Yes,
really, truly
yes.
collective. And I think again, I
That's
mentioned
so
Michael,
cool.
like he was constantly, putting together tapes for us, and so that we can review, sending us stats of players when they were playing overseas. So it's a collective effort. I think a lot of times we take a look at the head coach or we take a look at the general managers, and they get a lot of the credit when we're winning. But there's so many people behind the scenes, even more now
Mm-hmm.
than ever before, with the resources that WNBA teams are spending on staffing that help to put this together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is so cool. Okay, I feel like we were able to get inside of your mind. I feel so much smarter now. And now that we're just talking about the trade deadline and saying, oh, all these trades could happen and I'm making up scenarios, now we know all of the things that are going on behind the scenes that are really working in little pieces, drawing on napkins to make sure that the team is exactly how we want it to be. This is so, so cool. And I just wanted to ask too, what are you up to now, Angela? Because I feel like you have lived so many different lives and it's so cool. So what are you doing now?
Oh, what am I not doing? So a myriad of different things. What I did learn, and I think it was from that experience as a general manager, is I'm an entrepreneur, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, I love being able to start things and build things and grow them. And so, I have a variety of companies. My main company is the Dignitas Agency, which is a leadership development and change leadership company that focuses on equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy as well. I have a culinary experience company, Indulge Boise Food Tours, where we do culinary experiences here in
So
the Treasure
cool.
Valley in Idaho. I'm living in Idaho, back at home where I grew up, where my parents
Whoa.
retired, which is just so fun with the emerging culinary scene that we're experiencing here in Idaho. I have my family foundation, the Taylor Lead Foundation. We do scholarships for scholar athletes in high school and help them with the go on, right? Make sure that they continue to pursue a higher education. And First Fridays Boise, which is a networking event for Black and Brown professionals. So a variety of different things that kind of, Jordan, I would say it centers around my why.
Mm-hmm.
What I've learned over time is that my why is to um, transform this sense of silence into strength, and this sense of invisibility into impact through deep listening and understanding. And so all of the things that I'm doing include that. And then I have the pleasure of doing some broadcasting for college women's basketball, which is where you and I had the great fortune to get to know each other.
Oh, that is so cool. Wow. Well, I
A lot
love that.
going
You're
on.
busy, a lot of different things happening, but it keeps it exciting. And you talk about impact. And I'm sure at all of these positions that you have held, especially in the WNBA, your impact was felt and the ripple effects are definitely carrying on. And I know you impacted me when we worked together in set and on studio. So thank you, Angela, for your time, your wisdom. I'm sure people will be sending you even more questions. We might have to have you back, but thank you again. Thank you.
No, thanks for what you're doing and telling the stories of women's basketball in general and this season, the WNBA. It's an amazing time for women's sports writ large and specifically the WNBA. So I love what you're doing and enjoy listening to your shows.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an update. Your support means the world. And if you're feeling generous, leaving a quick rating or review helps more Hoops fans discover the show. And you can now see us on our brand new YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe there. Shoot us an email at women'shoops@odyssey.com to tell us what's on your mind. We want to hear your hottest takes, your burning questions, and all your feelings about all things women's hoops. We just might feature your note on the show. That's women'shoops@odyssey.com. The Women's Hoop Show is an Odyssey original podcast hosted by me, Jordan Robinson. Our producer is Phil Switek. Our video team is led by Kurt Courtney and includes Tim Meikle, Evan Cox, Allison Jeffrey, and Lauren Vieira. Our executive producers are Greg Holtzman, Asha Saluja, Danny Freisinger, Maddie Sprunkheiser, and Leah Reese-Dennis. And special thanks to Moira Curran and Josephina Francis.